Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is JC, and I'm back with another video for Team Empire. This time going over another premium tier list. The last time I did one, it was in the summer, shortly after History Collection came out, talking about the overall power level of each clan. But today I'm going to actually be going over a general tier list for each clan now that we have Springfest coming up. I think this might be relevant for some of you that are maybe hopping onto a team and playing the premium seat if you've never played it before, or if you are getting into premium and you haven't tested against a lot of matchups. Either way, we just have standard S through D for the tiers today, and S is going to be S is typically regarded as like a tier 1, but S for me will just be like among the best of decks, and then it goes on from there. And so I'll be talking about each clan and usually referencing the best deck within each of those clans when I'm talking about the current format. So let's go ahead and get started. The first clan we're talking about is Bermuda Triangle. I think Bermuda is in A tier, being like a good pick. The best deck in Bermuda right now is still Highlander, and that deck has changed a lot since Worlds last year because it's still like a ride down based deck, which isn't as strong right now because everyone is riding up, but it still has a very high ceiling, high roll plays that you can't really control. It's one of those decks where also, even though it's so high roll, you actually have to have a pretty high barrier of entry to it, because even though Kutire doesn't exist anymore, the deck building is very, very important, and understanding how to ride to maximize your ceiling as much as possible is very difficult. I don't know if that makes sense. But the other thing that's weak about this deck is you have to see Reindeer. Obviously there's a ton of ride targets within the deck, but if you don't see Reindeer, then you just have truly a Highlander deck that doesn't really do much. Kind of a high barrier to entry because the skill level of this deck is very high and you don't have Kutire anymore, and Kutire did make things a lot easier. So I definitely think it's decent, but it does struggle a little bit going into some of these superior striding decks. Because like when I play against Highlander now, it always feels somewhat fair unless they see Reindeer, they find Anj off of it, or Lara, or a Nesca going first, and then they ride down against me. That obviously feels unfair. And if they're playing Pearl Sisters and they open up early, but that's like 3 or 4 different things that might happen, rather than some of these decks that can always almost guarantee their strategy. So I'll put it in A because of the ceiling, but it'll probably be low A by the end of this video. Then Spike Brothers. I think Spikes, it's kind of in a weird place right now because Spikes was really good prior to History Collection, just having very good ride-up plays, which was a big strength in a lot of decks in a ride-down format. But now I actually haven't seen as many lists as I actually thought might appear, because people were very confused on whether or not they were going to do new Nova builds, with V Nova or with old Nova. I've seen people do both. I think it's a good deck. I'm only going to put it into B because I just think there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Like if you're going against an old, I say old as in like, just a V agreed on max deck, I still think that's really, really strong even without the History Collection stuff. But with the History Collection stuff, yes, you're building GB, but you're not getting the same type of pressure from the forces. So I think this is B, but it's definitely high B, because if you do, let's say, stick to your V Nova turn and then still go into to Galley the Stride, the 2022 Stride, that card is insane. And obviously that is a turn like 4 or 5 play, but I'll put it in high B because I do think some of these other decks just kind of like interrupt Spikes too much for them to have much of a game plan with their stand triggers. Angel Feather, I'm very sorry. This is typically regarded as one of like the worst clans in Premium. I have seen really cool lists, and I've seen like Angel Gize. I've seen some History Collection stuff that works well with like Angel of Broken Hearts or whatever, and the one girl that's like a multi-attacker. But this deck just doesn't plus a lot, and even though it did get a really good history collection stride, it's just never performed very well. Like, someone could argue C, but I mean, it's not going to be anywhere near a lot of these other clans. I think your best bet is still just playing Angel of Gize if you want to do well with this. Dimension Police. I don't know, man. I think it's an A. I think putting it an S would be too much credit, because the biggest problem with Dimension Police is it didn't benefit much from the recent changes to the format being history stuff. Because even decks that didn't change that much after history benefited from the somewhat from the superior strides. Whereas this clan didn't really want to change at all. It wanted to stay on liner and just get a bunch of shield. And there's still merit to that, but there are some strategies in this coming up later that play heavily around DP. One of them in particular basically shuts all their shield down, which is unfortunate. Now, this is a fan favorite clan, and I've seen some people have amazing records with it because they put a lot of time and testing into it. And obviously, the whole purpose of the deck is just to try to one-shot people. And if you're able to do that, then of course you're going to win. I definitely think it's better than something like Bermuda, because it's very, very consistent, even with all the grade 3s that it runs in its list. Shadow Paladin. So the two most popular builds are still like Luard and Raging Form. And if you watch the International Worlds Invitational, you probably saw some Revenger gameplay, and it's a really cool deck. I still think Luard is better. Now, people right now probably are coping on Crest Luard, but I think actually out of all the Crest builds we currently have in Premium, I think Luard's might be one of the, maybe one of the worst. Like, Crest, and even, comparable with Messiah in terms of, how shaky it is. The main reason is because the Crest tells you have to ride Dragheart Luard. And so that does conflict with Dragfall builds. That does, I think, conflict a little bit with, V Luard builds. And the ceiling is going to be crazy, but it's not like you can... ride Claret Sword and then don't go into history after doing Crest business. So I don't know, maybe I'm ignorant here. I still think regular V Luard stuff is good enough. That deck's really, really, really cool, and it opens very strong lines. I am putting it in B though, because the deck, even with the new G-Guard, I don't think it has as many defensive options as the best decks do. These two decks have really good G-Guards, and Bermuda has some really cool interaction just from a lot of the techs that they run. And then Dimension Police also has a ton of shield. Luard, yes, it stands Force Markers, yes, it has Morfessa, but if you still don't see your stands, then you're kind of screwed. And same thing with Raging Form. If you don't have enough of your pieces, if you don't open God Hands in Raging Form, then you basically have a very fair deck. So I think B is fair. Dark Irregulars, I'm going to put it in the same camp right now, in B. I don't actually know, I'll come back to this, if it's better than Shadow Paladin. The only deck we really talked about for Dark Irregulars is NLK. And that deck has always been the same in terms of its game plan, like I've talked about it last time. You find your NLK, you get enough soul charges, and you're probably going to be fine. You're probably going to have a very stable game plan. And if you high roll, then you're going to be even happier. I think this deck might be better than Shadows. And this deck also gains more tools more often than Shadow Paladin does, because NLK is just going to find new grade 3s that it finds nice. This is Genesis. So Genesis is in a weird spot because it did just win Worlds with Fenrir, and that kind of puts two decks in the spotlight, Regalia and Fenrir. Fenrir is a very, very defensive deck that has a lot of disruption with Fenrir's skill itself going into Vanagander, or Veratrum, or even like the G-Guard Omnivarta. I think it has a lot of ways to play around decks that do one annoying thing. Like, you know, you can give -2 crit to your opponent's restanders. You can completely remove an annoying piece that's going to extend and plus you later down the road. You can denial griffin them with Veratrum. You can do a lot of cool things, and that deck is able to scry quite a bit, which is a very infamous mechanic in Vanguard. I think, again, kind of like Bermuda, there's a high barrier to entry of this deck because you do have to manage your soul very, very well. There's also a market barrier to entry because one of the best cards in this clan is Dreaming Dragon, which is an old stand trigger that basically puts your entire drop zone back in the deck to prevent you from losing from deck out. So it completely counters one of your deck's biggest weaknesses since Genesis Soul charges so much. Because of the new Fenrir stuff coming to light and Regalia also just being a good deck, I think this clan can go in A. In fact, I think it's probably I think I would put it above Bermuda because of its consistency. Maybe stronger than DP because the thing is, actually, I am going to put it over DP because of all the defensive options I just displayed. Some people may not like this, but Jack plays this clan a lot. He doesn't play Fenrir, but even without playing Fenrir, you have a lot of really, really good tools that can play into a long game, which is something that a lot of decks actually can't do in the current format, even with how many cards people draw. The next clan is Great Nature. I think this is the first one that's going to hit C. History. It's really sad because I think the history stuff actually was going to help Great Nature a lot, but around that same time they decided to ban Spangled, and the main reason they banned Spangled, which is a G-Guardian that they have, is because with the combination of history stuff, you could get into Spangled faster and basically draw enough cards in your deck to be able to stack the over trigger, and that was kind of the only thing Great Nature had going for it in the current format with over triggers, which obviously they still have good strides, but they don't have a lot of plussing early. And so history was going to be the way to get that clan to draw a bunch of cards and then go into Spangled so that they have strong one really strong turn basically with the over trigger. And we don't like plays like that, but plays like that only exist because of the over trigger. So this isn't an over trigger debate, but basically Spangled leaving, it's not just an over trigger problem because Spangled was good before the over trigger. You would use Spangled to drop your entire hand to draw into a billion cards, leading you to pieces, to stride fodder, to more retire plays to stack your deck. It's really silly. It makes sense why they banned Spangled, but at the same time, we're just dancing around a problem. So because of that, Great Nature stays in C. It might have breached B, in my opinion, if we still had Spangled, because that at least gave the deck something really scary to go into. Kagero, the only thing we ever really talk about in Kagero is Overlord, because it's typically the best deck. We could sit here and talk about Lawkeeper, but then I think it would be a completely different video. Overlord, I think we can definitely put it in B, but it might be bottom of B just because it's a ride-up deck that has to see that it has to sack. If you get into your second turn and you go into Ducat or you Legion or you just see the over trigger, then obviously it's good, but all those rely on either pieces or sack. And when you're seeing all those things, the deck feels like this. But when you put it next to all these decks that have more overall consistency, then yeah, I think Overlord's probably bottom of B. You could even argue this, in my opinion, but I'm going to give it some credit. And now that I'm looking at this, I think I will put Shadows above DI because I was just talking consistency, and Shadows is far more consistent than DI. Now, if it's Crest build, it's probably not. It's probably there again, but I actually think Shadows might be better in just purely because of consistency. Now I'm looking at, what is this? OTT, Oracle Think Tank. This one's weird because this is one of those decks where there's a couple of decks like this where if you have a lot of play testing with this clan, then you're probably really, really, really good, good into turns, good into tournaments. You understand all your lines, and some people may raise their eyebrow at that because OTT is just like the Scrying clan that has Ichikishima. But when that's all that you have to play perfectly because everyone else has more unfair things, like when it comes to higher ceilings, higher numbers of attacks, more draw power. Because OTT, surprisingly enough, for how much it scries, doesn't plus that much. You have to, unless you're playing like a really heavy Battle Sister lineup, you have to play pretty perfectly with this deck to do well. Because of that, I don't think I can put it in C, because it's definitely better than Overlord. You have more early game options, and your stride pool is important, whereas in Overlord, the strides almost never come up. So I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it right under Spike Brothers. Gear Chronicle. So people like Dave Vecht are always doing well with this deck, like still with Steam Maiden builds, sometimes Chronojet builds. Chronojet has really solid defensive plays with Header around. And Gears just feels like one of those decks that's always getting really solid support but is never seeing a lot of results. I don't know. The problem is that this deck, even though it's decent with History Stride stuff, and it's even okay with Crest stuff, is that it still wants to just like ride down sometimes. That way your opponents can't completely sack you with their better strides. I think it's fair to put Gears, not an S, sorry. Is it better than Bermuda? Is Gears better than Bermuda? I'm going to say no. And if you're wondering why, it's like Gear Chronicle. I think the early game is amazing. The defensive plays are amazing. But the ride down is a little... The ride down game is a little... It's weird though, because it's like, do you want to... I think it depends on if you consider the ride down deck stronger or the History Collection deck stronger. I think the ride down might be stronger, but it requires a high level of testing and a high level of understanding with the deck. Because of that... Oh, hang on, wait. No, I think this is fair. Because Gears is a little more... I think they're a little more piece reliant because you have to superior ride your grade 4 from the deck, whereas you just need a Soul Blasting card in Bermuda for your ride down. So I think this is fair. Mega Colony. Mega Colony is one of those boogeyman decks where everyone's always afraid of it, and obviously Gridora is scary. Dark Face is also scary. However, there are a lot of decks in here that just do not care. Like, for example, Gears cares, but can play around it pretty well, I think, because it can just, plus without calling from Bind Zone. Bermuda doesn't really care. Dimension Police doesn't really care. Genesis kind of cares, but they can still just scry and have a decent turn regardless. And they kind of care because their G-Guards are really good. But I think Mega Colony can safely go, like, here because of its disruption with, like, all these B tier clans. And this deck did get much better with History's collection. It got much, much better because it had a better ride-up turn. Before, it just wanted to grade 2 game, and if it couldn't grade 2 game, it just had to ride something with a Protect. That way you had a PG to go into. But it got much, much better. I've actually... I play this deck occasionally just to help test my other picks, and I think that it's really, really good. But, the things that it's amazing against aren't exactly... It's not... The amount of things that it's really good against aren't exactly comparable to the things that don't care, so to speak. I hope that makes sense. But I think it's very much a boogeyman, and some people, just because of Gridora, put it way up there. And yeah, Gridora is a strong card, a strong stride, but you can have a really strong game prior to that and pressure them a lot. Royals, I'm sorry, Royal Paladin. I think Jewel Knights is very strong, but it has dropped off a lot because of superior stride plays, so they don't punish the opponent nearly as much with their early game. And this is one of those decks that kind of loses to heal guards. Like there's always, since heal guards, when heal guards first came out, there was always that question of, well, does my current deck play well into heal guards? And a lot of decks have managed around that pretty well. I don't think Royals is one of them, because there's a lot of superior calling, but doesn't have a very high ceiling until you get to your like Crystal Luster turn. And I still think Jewel Knights is the best build. We'll see how this changes though over the summer when we get the new deck set. Then Murakumo. I like this clan a lot. I think it did benefit from history. I don't think it's fair to put it over some of these lists though. Like, I think it's better than OTT most of the time, because it, even though it doesn't scry or anything, it thins a lot, and it has a lot of multi-attack. Even with just like Ushimitsu Train, which is the history strider, and Yasuie, you're able to just like call a whole field for free. You know, I mean, Counterblast 1 isn't always for free, but basically for free. And then depending on what you're calling, those units will either go away to draw cards, or they'll go away and then Yasuie will bring them back so that you have really strong G-Guard plays. Now, Spike Brothers also kind of does this, and it does it with a higher ceiling. That's why it's weird. Like, because if you're playing just pure Yasuie, then you're only going into you're only really going into your Restander stride. The it's like, I forgot his name off the top of my head, but it's like the red stride that can restand if you have like 5 different names, or 5 the same name, or you're doing like Shirayuki builds and trying to basically auto kill unless your opponent sees the overtrigger. And both those lists have their strengths and weaknesses, but they have a lot of notable weaknesses against some of the above clans, especially Mega Colony. This deck hard loses to Mega Colony. Narukami. Now, some people might call me coping on this. I think Narukami is still like one of the best decks, because even though the hit on the ban list was significant, like the choice restriction from Sweep Command and Sweep Command and Demolition Dragon, both those builds are still really strong in their own right, and the stride pool in Narukami is still very, very, very good. And again, you can say I'm coping, but the representation for this deck at Worlds was still very, very high, which means people value one of those two things. And I think more people have been picking like Demolition between the two, because it makes the early game really, really good, and then whenever the time is right, you just go into Vowing Saber and still stun burst. Like, I did this while testing Premium the other day. I was able to just kind of hang out on grade 2, because it's always a good grade 2 game, until my opponent finally committed a board and had a big drop zone, and it basically ended the game right there, because Vowing Saber then just raises the ceiling of the entire field, and you draw a billion cards while your opponent's binding stuff from your hand. So I think this deck is still really, really strong, and there's a really high chance of you seeing it if you're playing in day 2 of any of the tri-regulation stuff. And I could go more in depth, but I think that would end up being another video. Aqua Force. I'm not that knowledgeable about Aqua Force right in the current format, because I know that people like the History Collection stuff. I know some people still value the Ride Down stuff. Like, some people think it sucks. I think it's still okay. Like, Xavier, I know he plays some History Collection stuff with this. It didn't really change what the deck was doing, though, other than making 2 Excels, which makes your Pursuit Assaults stronger, faster. And then with 2 Excels, you can worry a little less about riding like Vithavus and have much stronger like stride turns faster. This deck kind of loses to Ghidorah, but also not really, because it's got a lot of potential in just restanding the board with its powerful cards and strides, or making cards disappear, like calling over. It doesn't lose as hard to Ghidorah as some people would think. Like, some of these decks just cannot do well under Ghidorah. Shadows has a really hard time. NLK has a hard time. Spike Brothers and Murakuma basically can't function. And OTT needs like good G-Guards to be able to do things. I think Aqua Force could actually be a very strong contender. And you know what? I actually think I'm going to cope a little bit on this one. I'm going to put it right here because it draws more cards than Bermuda Triangle, and when it comes to gears, I don't really know. I think Thavis, though, always, like the ride down builds, I always thought Thavis's ride down was a little better than gears anyway. So I'm going to put it here just for the overall ceiling. I've always thought Aqua Force was pretty good. I mean, call me out if you want, but Neo Nectar, I think this is one of the best decks in the format. Like, ever since Katrina, I even said one time that I think Katrina is pretty fair, but that was considering the power level of Premium right now. That didn't mean it wasn't strong. And it's very, very strong because now, the thing about Katrina was always like, Neo Nectar always had an amazing early game and then nothing to follow up on. But now that they have Katrina back, they have an amazing early game, and then they have Katrina to follow up to just basically bounce all of those early commits back to hand, or just get whatever you want from the deck while having an amazing ceiling turn. They also have the boogeyman factor of the Cray Elemental Superior Strider, so you basically cannot give this deck damage on for their turn 2 until you're sure that you can ride up safely, or until you're sure that like they don't have that in their deck, because not all lists play it, but some lists have been bringing it back. Because for a while lists were cutting it because everyone was dancing around them. But this deck is very, very good. The early game is crazy. I actually think most decks, if they can survive the early game, can stabilize pretty well against Katrina, especially some of these more defensive decks in the A tier. But people tend to, and this is in every format, people tend to think very, very differently when they're being rushed. Like, you probably noticed this in Standard, because people have been the best Standard decks have been very aggressive for a long, long time. Like, you think completely differently when you have to start thinking from turn 1 or turn 2, like, do I drop this 5k shield? Do I drop a trigger here? Do I take a damage and risk a defensive? It builds panic when you're playing. And Neo Nectar opens 3 lines almost every time immediately because of tokens. So, really good deck. This was also highly represented at Worlds, I'm pretty sure. Really, really strong deck. Nova Grapplers, I think people kind of cope. This is another one of those decks, like OTT, where I was saying, if you play this deck a lot and try lots of different things and have a lot of experience, then you're probably really, really, really good. Like Stephen Lee, I think he got 3rd at Worlds with Victor. That's what we're talking about, of course, Victor. And they've gotten a lot of really, really good cards over the past year. Like, they benefited a lot from the V promos, that top 5 Scry. They've benefited a lot from certain overdress cards. It goes over Ghidorah for sure, because they have like the Scarlet Bird, which isn't always played, but once it's on place, you can like restand your whole board for free. So, I mean, that's an easy kill against Ghidorah. But I don't think it breaches A purely because this deck still loses very hard to defensives, and I mean, it loses to PGs. It's not like Dimension Police where you have Linka. And I know someone call me out, like a Bustard turn is still very, very scary, but this is easier to manage against than things like Thavis, because Thavis has higher ceiling. So sure, they're not always getting restands, unless they have like their V promo dragon, or if they have, not Adelaide, but Narissa, which is like making an 18k boost or an 18k attack. They don't have the same ceiling. They're just like committing and rushing to their win, literally. So, very, very good deck though, and again, very high barrier to entry in terms of experience. Like, you have to play this deck a lot. And I've kind of neglected to talk about all these, pretty much every single premium deck has benefited in some way from the new V promos, the one that are top 5 to add a grade 1 or grade 2. Like, most lists in premium right now run 3 to 4 of those because they are crazy cards. Like, V doesn't have a lot of space for them, but premium cares a lot. Like, the best decks, most of the S and A lists here play copies of those cards because they're really, really good. So try to pick them up. Maybe your shop can like help you out, your local shop. Nubatama. This is, honestly, I think Nubatama is the best deck. Well, it'll contend with one other one coming up, but I think Nubatama is definitely in argument, like in the discussion of being one of the best decks. Purely because of Rine in combination with Mizukaze. Mizukaze is a busted card. That card should be banned. Absolutely should be banned. I'm putting that out there right now. Very unfair card. Your opponent literally sometimes cannot do anything because of Oboro. And this deck will see high representation because it's also gaining popularity from being reprinted in history, and people are coping with their crest builds, which I don't even think the crest idea is bad. Like, most crest builds are bad, but one of Nubatama's biggest weaknesses was that if you didn't ride Unin, you got really scared with consistency. So sure, if you don't have Unin, but you have Seizui, the crest thing, sure, you're not confirming your grade 3 that you want, but at least you're drawing 2 cards. Like, you're pushing further into your deck. And then if you find Oboro, then you're going to have a much, much higher ceiling later in the game. This deck is crazy. And it's not even just Mizukaze, honestly. The Stride, the G-Zone is very toolboxy in this deck, and it can commit an early game if you build it properly, because Nubatama cards just bounce themselves back to hand. And there was a weakness in the deck before where, like, if you didn't ride up properly into like something with Protect before Oboro, then you may not survive. But now we have History Collection, you get 2 PGs, which most of the time do help you survive into like a Rine turn. Even if you don't Rine, this deck actually hard counters things like DP with certain strides that they have, because then they're able to turn off a lot of shield. Do that research on your own, because I don't really want to spoil all the sauce. But this deck is really, really strong. I think there's a really good chance of you seeing this on day 2, because, again, its popularity is very high right now because of how much people talk about it in Standard. And that's why you see all these buyouts. It's not just because Shiranui is strong, and because Stride deck sets are strong, but because there are a lot of people out there trying to grab 4 copies of the grade 1 in the Stride deck set. So, learn about this deck for sure. This deck is really, really, really good. One of the best decks. Gold Paladin. Golds, I gotta be honest, I don't know a lot about what Gold Paladin is doing right now. But I do think it's a very strong... It's always been one of those either broken or really good decks in Premium, because it has amazing support. Like, amazing options to run that help you plus, that help you multi-attack. Gurgit is always strong. I know the Gurgit History Collection stuff is strong. This is just like a really good stuff deck that has also amazing G-Guards. There's a lot of good things to say about this deck, but it doesn't have anything completely unfair. It has Percival, it has Holy Shine, but I haven't seen it converting that much, so I'm not going to give it a crazy amount of credit until I start seeing more results, or until I start testing against it more. What is this? Oh, shoot. Granblue. Granblue's an S. Granblue is very, very strong because of history stuff again, and because it's one of those decks that can just search Forbidal or search Elementaria. And people aren't really damage denying right now because everyone's riding up. So Granblue benefits by the actual health of the format too, because now people just get to play 4-column Bard and search whatever they need. And I don't know. Honestly, I think you could argue either of these, because Granblue is able to grab as many heals basically as it needs because of Greed Shade, like how many Greed Shades you're playing, and it has defensive options outside of a guarding from hand. So you could say Granblue's best deck. I think that would be completely fair, because the best Granblue players also do play around Narukami. But in a general like Granblue seat, it probably looks something like this, or even like this, because if you have a very new premium player playing Granblue against Narukami, they're probably going to lose. I just say you need a lot of testing against that to know when to go into your Bell or to go into your Ghoul Dragon. But against a good Granblue player, it's going to look more like this, and then again maybe like this. It depends. I think these are interchangeable, but these 2 decks are probably the best decks in the format, if I'm just being completely honest. Link Joker. Okay, so this one requires more discussion, I think, than Gridora, because it has something that Gridora does not. Even though it doesn't shut down Superior Calling in general, Chaos has a very strong interaction against most of these builds in that if you give them a gift and they're a history deck, they can't go into their history stride anymore because the text says, if you have not received a gift this fight. So if you receive a gift from Chaos Breaker before riding into your old G Strider, then you don't get to do that play anymore. And so I'm actually going to put it like, this is kind of cope, but bottom of A, because there are situations where Chaos just wins the die roll and it kind of auto wins against a lot of little interactions towards those decks. I don't think it's fair to put it any higher though, because it's Link Joker. It's always been one of those decks where it's like it's going to try to do its floodgatey thing, but some decks just don't care. However, I think too many of the decks on this list do care about that history collection interaction, and a lot of people don't even know about it. Like we're thinking about the one seat you're going to have on your tri-regulation format, and if you have someone there that's new into Premium, playing into a Link Joker and trying to do their history stuff, then they're going to feel like they auto-lost. So I think bottom of A is fair because the decks above it have a lot of alternative options, especially if you're against a good player, but a lot of the decks below it do not. So, like, think about how if you shut down Gold's Gurgit, like if they just play 4 History Collection Gurgit, then sure they have Percival probably, but it's not changing the fact that you just took away one of their strongest plays. Pale Moon, I still think, even though Derek Dow has been doing really, really well with Harry builds, I still think Nightmare Dolls is very good. And I think it can safely go like here. Harry has more defensive interactions, which would probably put it above Dimension Police. But Nightmare Dolls still has a more reliable win con, in my opinion, being either just Dark Lord Princess Sack or the Dust, which is the Zeroth Dragon. And very high ceiling deck. This deck never stopped being good. I always tell people that. This was like, when this was best deck in the format, it was very, very fair. And a lot of decks could still live up to it. But I do think it's better than Thavis. And I think it's better than Bermuda because, again, just more consistency routes. Last but not least, Tachikaze. Sadly, I think this deck is lacking in the current format. It used to have a place back in like Nightmare Doll format when there were like lots of 12Ks. And even though the history collection stuff has helped Tachi a lot, it's one of those decks, kind of like Nova's, where you need a lot of experience, but even more, because this deck has a significant weakness, and that is deck out. Like, it loses to defensives, and then it decks out quite a bit because of equip gauges, and it does draw a lot of cards, which is a plus. But you have to build this deck around the format, have a lot of experience with it, like kind of like Card Dweeb. I don't know if y'all ever heard of Card Dweeb, but he plays Tachikaze a lot and knows a lot about Premium in general, and so that's why he's able to have high success. But just playing this into a tournament, going into something like, even Kagero, like if Kagero stacks you a little bit, then you're done for. You could argue this, like I wish I could put Tachis in V right now, but I don't feel comfortable doing so. And that's every clan in Premium. So if you look at this right now, I think the 4 decks in S are what you are most likely to see in the most competitive scenarios. So thinking about tri-regulation, ideally every player is that if there's a team that's trying to win, they'll try to put probably one of each best deck in each seat. It's not like we're all playing the same format. And so I think you're very, very likely, if you're playing in the premium seat, to play against one of those 4 decks at the top. And the A tier ones are like, these are also really popular. But if there's any of these clans that you're super interested in, I would look into them, whether to play or if you just don't know what I've been talking about, you can go look on Decklog. These are my thoughts on the premium meta right now. This could absolutely change during Springfest, and my thoughts are not final. I still have a lot of testing to do, and nothing I'm saying is objective. It's just from my experience and what I've been seeing recently from Worlds and from lists on Twitter and from the Invitational. So thank you for your time. Please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about any of my opinions, or what your opinions are about any of these clans or any of these choices I made. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and good luck in any of your Springfest events if you are attending any. Good luck to you and your team. Goodbye.